Howdy everyone, my name's Chris and today I'm going to take a close look at Sigma's new 18 to 35mm f1.8 DC HSM lens. In the world of camera lenses, progress in lens design tends to be pretty evolutionary, with newly released lenses often being improved versions of older designs. But this time we have something a little bit spectacular. This is the first SLR zoom lens in the world to have a very fast constant maximum aperture of f1.8. In other words, this zoom lens lets in a lot of light. f1.8 is a very nice aperture indeed, amazing for a zoom lens. It lets in plenty of light for video work, shooting at night or shooting indoors. It's a really fast aperture. Normally, even the fastest zoom lenses, some of which I've been reviewing recently, only have a maximum aperture of f2.8. Well, f1.8 lets in over twice as much light and also gives you a background that's over twice as blurry. However, as you can see here, the zoom range of 18 to 35mm isn't very long, even less than a normal camera's kit lens. So in reality, this is basically a wide-angle zoom lens, so don't expect to take pictures of anything that's far away. Am I bothered by that? Not really. I always wanted a fast wide-angle lens for my camera, and now I can have one that zooms in and out. Neato. That extra light is so useful for video work. Here's some video at 18mm and f3.5, the widest aperture of Canon and Nikon's kit lenses. The picture quality is pretty rough, as the f3.5 aperture meant I had to use a very high ISO on the camera of 3200. But here's the same footage with the lens at f1.8. Now I can use an ISO of only 800 because the lens is letting in 4 times more light, so the camera can produce much better picture quality. And the other cool thing about this lens is that it doesn't cost an absolute fortune. For such a revolutionary and practical lens, the price of about £550 is quite reasonable. But in real terms, it's still a bit of a hit on your wallet, so let's see if it's worth it. And remember, this lens is designed to work on less expensive APS-C digital cameras. That means pretty much all digital SLR cameras that cost less than £1,000. I did try it out on a full-frame camera, but as you can see here, I just got a ton of vignetting, even at 35mm, so there's not much point really. Most people have APS-C cameras though, and you can check on Google if you're not sure. Firstly, you can see that this lens is big. It's quite long, but fairly thin. It's made of metal and feels fantastic to hold in your hand. It's also pretty heavy, so it feels more at home on a bigger camera body like my Canon 60D here. It is big, but I love the design. The zoom ring turns the opposite way from Canon lenses, which took me a little getting used to. But it's extremely smooth and precise, and quite heavy to turn, so it feels wonderful to use. The lens zooms internally, which is always a nice touch. As you can see here, zooming in and out while you're doing video work is amazingly smooth, and you don't get annoying changes in light levels like you would do with a more basic lens with a variable maximum aperture. You can also see that there's no image stabilization on this lens, but because this is a wide-angle lens, that's not such a complete disaster. The focus ring is super smooth and well damped, like those classic lenses from the 1960s and 70s. It's extremely precise, great for pulling focus during video work. The lens has full-time manual focusing, so you can enjoy turning that focus ring even if it's set to autofocus. And the front element of the lens doesn't move while you're focusing, so that's yet another professional touch. The autofocus motor is quite fast and almost completely silent. It seems that the days of inaccurate Sigma lenses are gone, as this lens focuses very accurately in normal use, which is great. From time to time it'll completely miss, and you'll get a soft picture, but only occasionally, so I'm really very happy with its performance. Basically, the lens is comparatively big and heavy, but it handles like a dream. I especially like its metal construction. I'd say that Canon's famous L lens series has some major competition coming up. Anyway, that's enough drooling. When I first heard about this lens, I was pretty impressed that someone had actually made an f1.8 zoom lens. But then I started thinking, gosh, the picture quality is bound to be pretty poor. I mean, I'm normally unsatisfied with f1.8 prime lenses, which don't zoom at all. So how on earth could the picture quality of an f1.8 zoom lens be any good? Well, I've tested it on my 18 megapixel Canon 60D, so let's take a look together. At 18mm with the aperture open at f1.8, the picture quality in the middle is amazingly sharp. There's plenty of resolution, contrast, and no purple haze at all. Very impressive. If we move into the corners, where fast lenses normally struggle, we can see that the picture is still very sharp indeed, with only a little chromatic aberration visible in the window frames and on other contrasting edges. It's only in the very extreme corners that we can see any kind of softness. What an astonishing performance. Stop the lens down to f2.8 and the corners become even sharper, and at f4 the lens is simply razor sharp from corner to corner, although a tiny hint of chromatic aberration is still visible. In the middle of the image, everything remains perfect. This is an absolutely amazing performance, even better than Canon's best APS-C zoom lens, the 17-55mm f2.8 IS-USM, which actually costs more money. So let's zoom all the way into 35mm. With the aperture open at f1.8, the centre of the frame is slightly less sharp than it was at 18mm, but still very impressive indeed, with absolutely no aberrations or optical problems. The corners are basically the same, very sharp, but this time with no chromatic aberration at all. Again, this is a great showing for any f1.8 lens, especially one which can zoom. Stop the aperture down to f2.8 and the sharpness in those corners makes the final leap from being very good to becoming incredible. That's astonishing for any camera lens at f2.8. I mean, did this thing fall from a spaceship or something? Look back in the middle of the image and the same improvement has happened. I won't bother showing you any other apertures because the lens is so sharp at f2.8 that any improvement will be barely noticeable. You'd have to get scientific on that thing. Simply put, I could never have imagined this lens would be so sharp. Hopefully I'm not sounding like some kind of Sigma fanboy, because I'm being as objective as I can here. The pictures speak for themselves. The image quality is wonderful. Let's take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 18mm there is mild barrel distortion, as you can see in the slight curve in those straight lines, but it's much less than with other zoom lenses. This great result is probably due to the lens's smaller zoom range. This makes me happy. I hate barrel distortion. There's only a little vignetting in the corners, which is another surprisingly good result, as you'd expect a fast wide-angle lens to have corners which were quite dark. Zoom in to 24mm and the barrel distortion is gone, but the corners become just slightly darker. At 35mm, we see some mild pincushion distortion, and the corners become a little darker again, reaching average levels of vignetting for a lens at f1.8. Stop down to f2.8 and the vignetting goes away. Overall, a very good performance for distortion and vignetting. This lens can also focus very close to your subject. Combined with the wide angles and f1.8 aperture, this means you can get a lot of extremely fun and very creative photos which just aren't possible with other lenses. At 18mm, the close-up image quality is very sharp, straight from f1.8, improving even more as you stop down. However, if you zoom the lens in to 35mm, then your close-up pictures will be a little soft at f1.8, so you might want to stop down a little to f2.8 for more sharpness. As you can see here, the lens works okay against bright light, maintaining good contrast, but a bit of flaring is visible. The lens has a slight issue with longitudinal chromatic aberration. This picture was taken at f1.8, and if we look closely, we can see that the out of focus highlights have picked up a little colour. Behind the plane of focus, the writing is a little blue and yellow in front of the plane of focus. These are slightly unusual colours for longitudinal chromatic aberration, but thankfully it's not too bad, and once you've topped down to f4, it's basically gone away. Finally, this lens has very nice quality bokeh. If you look at those out of focus areas, they look really nice and smooth, even at this wide angle of 18mm. At 35mm, the bokeh is just as impressive. That's really important for any fast lens, and despite the Sigma's wider angles, the wide aperture means you can get some pretty out of focus backgrounds. So, I'd better wrap up this review. And what more could I possibly say? The Sigma 18-35mm f1.8 DC HSM is a masterpiece. It's got even better picture quality than most f1.8 prime lenses, which can't even zoom. Professional photographers and amateurs alike will love this lens. The f1.8 maximum aperture is at once practical for video work and shooting indoors, and also intensely creative, especially as you can focus this lens so closely to your subject. Its large size and narrow zoom range means that this won't be a great lens for travelling, and some video makers will really miss having image stabilization. But they'll also love having an f1.8 aperture available and everything that entails. This lens is a very great achievement for Sigma, and although it's probably something that more advanced photographers will appreciate the most, it's also an extremely practical and useful lens for many applications. I borrow and hire a lot of camera lenses for my reviews. This is one of the few which I've actually gone out and bought. The thing is amazing. Very highly recommended.